It seems to me quite extraordinary that you could imagine that evolution has operated on the reproductive systems and has had absolutely no effect at all on our brain, the single most expensive organ that we have in the body.
So what I'm discussing here in this video is the general zeitgeist concerning areas such as the state or academia or the scientific community or society, individuals, even our own little society here on YouTube, talking about such matters, and its relation to such areas of studies as either gender studies or race studies, and the differences between certain groups, let's say. Now, my position is that, well, first let me explain, right? Look at it like this way. There's a general, you could say, a gradient of sorts. Now, we're not living in some extreme political times where we take anybody who wants to study this sort of matter behind the shed and shoot them. That would be the extreme end. No, that's not how I see the United States today. All right, so you got two poles there. One, a completely open society that studies these things without worry, and the opposite end where even mentioning such a thing will get you shot by the political party in charge, whether that be in state or academia or whatever. If I had to put the United States somewhere in that regards, I would think it's probably in the middle, somewhere around there. Maybe more to the extreme end, but not that much. That's where I see it. Now, I come to that conclusion by my personal interactions in real life, my readings, my studyings of these different areas, and even our own little personal society here on YouTube. So a great example, a great contemporary example of a society that's even more closed off than the United States is Norway. At least from what I'm hearing, at least from what I'm reading. Now, one example of that is a video that was linked to by a YouTube user, Stardust. And he linked to a documentary made in Norway called The Gender Equality Paradox. It's about a 40-minute long documentary, and if you want to go watch that, I will link that below, but I will just sum it up here real quick. All right, let me just name some of the actors here. Now, the Norwegian Broadcasting Company, and this comes from Wikipedia, usually known as NRK, is the Norwegian government-owned radio and television public broadcasting company and the largest media organization in Norway. It is a founding member of the European Broadcasting Union. And in this video, the fellow who is, I don't know his name, who is the reporter in this documentary, he wants to know, why is it that in the purported most egalitarian society in the world, why is it that the gender roles appear to be the same, right? And after all this time, all the work they've done there to make themselves egalitarian, why is it that their gender roles are essentially still being played out? He goes by way of it through the nature versus nurture debate. The first two places he goes to find out his answer as to why the state of the sexes in the most egalitarian society is still like that of patriarchal society that might be described by a radical feminist of sorts. He goes to the research director at the Work Research Institute. Her name is Catherine Egeland, and she is on the management team. Now, this is from Wikipedia. The Work Research Institute is a social science research institute based in Oslo, Norway. It is state-owned, but independent in its research. Its purpose is to produce systematic knowledge of working life. The institute was founded in 1964. So he goes and speaks to this woman first, and he brings up essentially the nature side of humanity. She essentially scoffs at this. I mean, watch this on her face. I'm going to play some of it for you now. So she denies it, right? outright. And that's what it is. It's a denialism. So on that scale, keeping in mind our general zeitgeist, we look at Norway, and you see someone at the state-run Institute for Social Science Research, right? And this woman is on the management team. And look at her. Look at her face. Oh, we don't study that here. So the next fellow he goes and sees is a Joergen Lorenzten at the Center for Interdisciplinary Gender Research at Oslo University. And this is the senior researcher there, okay? And just a bit about the center. It aims, they say, to undertake interdisciplinary research, teaching and share communication within the field of gender. The center also supports and encourages gender research within different faculties of the university, but apparently not in the biological areas. Because this is another fellow who is just like, whoa, what are you talking about? Nature? No. It's all nurture here. We don't even study the nature side. Until they have absolute proof, we won't even consider it. By the way, the center is the largest gender research department in Norway and among the largest in the Nordic countries. So a fair representation, I would say, although not complete, like a thorough investigation here, but I think a fair representation of the general zeitgeist concerning these areas. So after being scoffed at, he decides he has to go out of the country, which I find amazing. He has to go out of the country to seek out answers. He goes to the United States and he goes to Britain. And he finds the research going on amongst the psychological research, biological research, whatever it may be, in regards to the gender differences. And they're representing more of the nature side of the differences. And what's so interesting, he shows the video from the two researchers that he talked to earlier, and shows them to these other researchers in the United States and Britain. And their reactions are just like, oh my lord, what is going on over there in Norway? So we could see the differences here on our gradient. We can see that Norway is pushing further to the right, the more extreme end of a hostile environment. And then he gets more tape from those researchers, and he takes it back to Norway, those other the Norway researchers. And he plays it for them, and Catherine is she's shocked. She's just like stumbling with her words. She can't explain herself. And then Joergen, he just comes out with the complete denial. It's like, well, until he comes out with the high standard. Well, until they absolutely have proof down to the gene, they just can't. We can't even deal with that. So I was reminded of the conversation I had with a YouTube user, SofiaRune, who describes herself as a student researcher in genetics regarding flowers or something of that nature, who has chosen to interject herself into our own little society here on YouTube regarding this area. And we can measure this zeitgeist here as well. And you can see, anybody who's been involved, you can see it's definitely a hostile environment. And all these other elements are there. This is also a contemporary example. And she tells me that I'm chasing ghosts. She brings up an example of a researcher, a geneticist, Lahn. And if you read the story of Lahn, you can see that, well, yes, while he was given awards and he is still doing his work, well, his wings, I believe, were essentially cut. The wind was essentially taken out of his sails, so to speak. And this is a man who, if you read at least the articles on, you get the feel that he was so excited and motivated to do this type of research and understand the differences between humans and even groups, things of that nature, and took a chance. And once he really felt the ringer of the zeitgeist of the United States, well, he pretty much let that dream go. She tells me, Sophia tells me I'm chasing ghosts. I don't think I'm chasing ghosts. I think I'm seeing the reality for what it is. And though, like I said, we're not taking these folks behind the shed, giving them a bullet to the head, well, we're not exactly welcoming them with open arms either. And which is what's funny, because that's, the guy who's doing that documentary. And I used to have that naive view, too, of the world when I was younger, that, especially in these areas, academia and such, that ideas should flow, and although there may be differences, we don't shut out people in these different ways through ostracism, through things of that nature. But that's just not the reality. That's just that's naivete. Anyway, so that's how I see it in the United States. I see us not as bad as Norway, but another way to describe it, I would say, is that I was watching a John Paul Dorn video, but I was watching some of what his interview he had with a police officer, a retired police officer, and how this police officer was describing how he would get individual people or individual officers alone and talk to them about the drug war and how they felt, yeah, it's wrong. The way we're going about this is just wrong and just destructive to society. But when they all get in a group, they go the opposite route and they support the drug war. I think what's happening in regards to the gender differences and race differences, things of that nature, is very similar to that. I think if you can get a lot of these folks who are in denial alone, they would say, yeah, that's the way of it. But once they get in the group, or how they present themselves publicly, it goes the opposite way. The biggest fear, and they even state this outright, the biggest fear is that it will support something like what Hitler did, things of that nature. That's the extreme end. It's like, or some sort of Darwinian thing where we're justified somehow, and we can destroy an entire race, or we're justified somehow in keeping a certain gender in a certain place, things of that nature, because of this research. And that's just not the case. What you're doing there is you're going out of the scientific realm and into the philosophical realm, and that's really up for the philosophers to decide. If the science of ought is what's known as ethics. So leave it to them, and the world will be just fine. So peace out, my brothers, sisters, and everyone.
Absolutely amazing. I'm astonished that someone could say that. I guess the question I would pose is, where do bodily differences come from? Where do the differences between men and women's reproductive systems come from? Evolution, I'm sure, would be the answer that most social scientists would give. And what orchestrates those bodily differences? What is responsible for the production of hormones and peptides that keep everything going? The human brain, mostly, yes, through feedback systems. It seems to me quite extraordinary that you could imagine that evolution has operated on the reproductive systems and has had absolutely no effect at all on our brain, the single most expensive organ that we have in the body.